Okay, welcome back to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're unpacking something happening right now in Los Angeles. We're basing this on the CBS News report you shared.
That's right. And it details a situation that's, well, pretty rare, isn't it? It certainly grabbed a lot of attention.
Definitely. So the core of this deep dive is the deployment of U.S. Marines on U.S. soil.
Yeah, specifically assigned to protect federal property. And the article, it grounds this whole thing in the context of recent protests.
Protests following immigration enforcement operations, the ICE raids
Yeah,
in the area.
exactly.
So it's really a snapshot from the source material showing how these different layers are interacting. You've got the federal government, state and local folks, the military.
Right, all against this backdrop of immigration enforcement.
So our mission today is to zero in on the key details the article presents, look at the different perspectives it highlights.
And sort of see what we can learn from this specific moment about the bigger picture reported.
Absolutely. It's complex,
Yeah.
but the source gives us a clear starting point.
Yeah, it does.
So let's just jump right into the scene the article sets. It tells us about, 200 Marines arriving in Los Angeles?
Around 200, yeah. And their immediate assignment, as reported, was guarding the Wilshire Federal Building that's in Westwood.
Okay.
They started that duty on Friday, June 13th. Flew in the night before, apparently.
And this isn't just an isolated group, right? The article puts them in a wider context.
Correct. According to the source, these 200 Marines, they're part of a much larger group. Over 2,000 National Guard soldiers and 700 Marines total.
Wow.
Yeah, that President Trump federalized the weekend before. So it's one piece of a bigger military activation.
Which, immediately brings us to political side of things. The article really highlights this stark divide.
Oh, definitely.
How does the source frame President Trump's reasoning? Why send the troops?
Well, the article quotes him directly, saying he believed the city would be burning to the ground right now if he hadn't activated them.
So a preventive measure from his viewpoint.
That's how it's presented, yes, as necessary.
And then you have California Governor Gavin Newsom. How does he characterize it in the source?
Completely differently. The report says Governor Newsom called the move authoritarian.
Authoritarian. So right there you see that direct clash. Same action, two totally opposing interpretations reported.
Exactly. Between the president and the state's governor.
And it wasn't just words, was it? This political clash, it went to court.
That's right. The article details how Governor Newsom challenged the decision legally.
And initially, what happened there, according to the source?
Well, initially, a federal judge actually sided with Newsom. This was Thursday night. Issued an order blocking the deployment.
Okay, so a block. But that didn't last long.
No, not at all. The appeals court stepped in almost immediately, the source says.
When was this?
Later that same evening, they temporarily halted the judge's order, put it on pause.
So, based on the article, what's the current status then for these troops in L.A.?
As the source reports it, they're allowed to stay. For now, anyway. At least until a scheduled hearing.
Okay.
That hearing's with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, set for June 17th. So it's, a very dynamic legal fight playing out.
Yeah, unfolding in real time, really. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. The article also gives us insight into how the military itself is defining the role here.
Right. It mentions a news conference. Major General Scott M. Sherman.
And what did he say?
General Sherman, according to the source, was very specific. He emphasized the sole mission,
Which is?
strictly protecting federal property and personnel. Like that federal building they're guarding, that's it.
Okay, but the source mentions their equipment. They're armed, they have crowd control gear, riot shields, batons, gas masks.
Yes, they have that equipment. But despite that, the stated role is quite limited.
How so?
Well, General Sherman clarified, as reported, that these soldiers are not participating in law enforcement activities themselves.
Okay.
Their focus, he said, is on protecting the federal law enforcement personnel. And he also noted, interestingly, that the National Guard soldiers who've been deployed since Sunday, they also haven't been involved in law enforcement. And thankfully, no troops injured.
Okay, that's good context.
Yeah.
He did mention, though, that they'd observed federal law enforcement making arrests while they were providing protection, but hadn't had to detain anyone themselves. Until something happened that Friday.
Right. And the article does mention some, let's say, uncertainty about the assignment for the other 500 Marines federalized, though Sherman mentioned recent training focused on defending federal property for them, too.
But that incident you mentioned, that detention, That seems like a key detail from the source.
It really is. The article goes into it.
Right.
A temporary detention that happened right outside the Wilshire Federal Building on that Friday.
The very building the Marines were guarding.
Exactly. And this was confirmed to CBS News by a spokesperson for U.S. Northern Command.
Okay, so official confirmation.
Yes. And the command's statement in the source, it's interesting, it sort of addresses the capability of these troops.
What do they say?
They stated that Title X forces, that's the classification for these federalized troops, they may temporarily detain someone,
Okay.
but only under specific circumstances. And crucially, they added that any detention like that has to end immediately once the person is transferred to, regular civilian law enforcement.
Got it. And the article, it actually names the person detained, citing Reuters.
It does. Marcos Liao. He's described as a 27-year-old immigrant and a U.S. Army veteran.
An Army veteran. Wow. What does the source say about his side of the story, his experience?
Leo told reporters, according to the source, that he thought it was mistaken identity. He believed he was mistaken for a protester.
But he wasn't protesting.
No, he said he was actually just on his way to the VA office in that building. He was eventually released.
And there's a quote from him in the article that really stood out to me.
Yeah, it's quite something. He's quoted saying, "They treated me very fairly."
Mm-hmm.
And he mentioned being told something like, "Understand, this is a whole stressful situation for everybody, and we all have a job."
That specific interaction, reported right there in the source, it provides such a concrete example, doesn't it, of the military's presence on the ground, potential actions.
Even within that stated limited scope, yeah. It adds a layer to that whole discussion about their role versus their equipment.
The line between protection and, well, interaction with civilians.
Precisely.
And speaking of interaction, the article also includes the local response from the city's leadership.
Right. LA Mayor Karen Bass, according to the source, she denounced both things, the military presence and the ICE raids.
The raids which were kind of the initial catalyst for the protests.
Exactly. Her statement, as reported, really ties the troop deployment back to the impact of the enforcement itself.
What does she say?
She's quoted saying the situation is causing, fear and panic because the raids, and that solutions aren't found by, and this is her quote, chasing people at car washes, by intimidating families in their schools, or by sending troops into an American city.
So her stance, as presented in the article, clearly aligns more with the governor's view.
Very much so, that the deployment is inappropriate and directly linked to those broader enforcement actions.
And the source does give us some background on those ICE actions, doesn't it, to paint the larger picture?
It does. It includes some pretty notable statistics on detention levels.
Like what?
As of that Friday morning, the article reports a record number, 56,300 individuals in ICE detention centers nationwide.
A record number. Wow.
Yeah. And it gives recent arrest numbers, too, from just before the deployment really ramped up. 1,400 arrests on the Thursday, 1,600 on the Wednesday before that.
Big numbers.
Very big. The article also adds some context on the trend. It notes that while ICE arrests, they've gone up like over 100% since President Trump's first 100 days. They still remain below this reported White House demand of 3,000 daily arrests.
So the source shows us this intense level of enforcement activity happening at the same time as the military deployment and all the political and legal challenges.
Exactly. It really does bring together all these different threads the article lays out.
Yeah, you've got the rare federal military presence, the intense legal and political fight over it, the military's own defined role versus the reality on the ground.
Like that detention incident.
Right. And then the underlying ICE operations driving the initial unrest. It's quite an intersection of events reported in that CBS News piece.
It is. It provides a really focused look at a specific moment in what sounds like a larger, rapidly developing story.
And it kind of leaves us with something specific from the source material to think about, doesn't it?
Like what?
Well, consider that temporary detention incident, the one involving Marcos Liao, the Army vet, as described by both him and U.S. Northern Command in the article.
Okay.
What is that specific detail, military personnel equipped for crowd control, actually making a temporary detention, even if it's permissible under certain rules and within a protective mission? What does that reveal?
About the practical challenges, maybe.
Yeah, the practical challenges, the potential impacts of having federal troops present in a civilian environment like this, even when their stated mission isn't law enforcement. What does that single reported event add to your understanding of the bigger picture presented right there in the source?
That's a really good point. Definitely something worth reflecting on based just on what the article shares.